So for some time now, I've been wanting to strengthen my refuge and to really generate a deeper understanding of the causes of refuge. So I decided that I would dedicate some time to do further study and contemplation on that. And I thought I'd share some of my thoughts as a result of that process. So the first thing that I realized is that I really didn't have a good handle on the causes of refuge. I mean, I had a general understanding, but there were gaps in that understanding that I wanted to address. So I began by taking a look at those. And so, what are they? There are three. One is wisdom, fear. The other one is faith in the three jewels. And the last one is compassion for all sentient beings. So, what is wisdom, fear? I think it's having a clear understanding of our situation, where we are, and why. And as Venerable Seppel said this morning during stand-up meeting, do I really understand that the pancakes are in the nature of suffering? Not at the moment that they were served on that table, for sure. Not when I was eating them either. Not before, when I was hoping that not afterwards, when I was hoping that I could get some more, but I didn't. So, wisdom fear is not just really looking at the pain that we suffer, although that can be a good reminder of our situation in cyclic existence, but looking at the deeper suffering, and that's the suffering of pervasive conditioning, which really means that we're propelled in the cycle of rebirth without having any choice, propelled by karma and afflictions. And to really get a better understanding of that, I decided to look at the 12 links of dependent origination, which again, I had a very general feel for, but hadn't yet looked at them deeply. And why is this important? Because this is how we cycle in samsara as a result of ignorance. And getting to the bottom of that and really generating a clear understanding is helpful in generating all the other components of refuge. And so there are two types of ignorance that I was looking at. The ignorance of cause and effect, and then the ignorance of the ultimate nature of the self, which leads to self-grasping. And these two ignorance are the root of both non-virtuous as well as virtuous action. And both of those, virtue and non-virtue, are what propel us onto cyclic existence. And this wisdom fear is not really a panic fear. And I thought that I had to have a panic fear. I thought I had to have a fear that was, it's kind of a diluted fear in nature, in that it sort of closes the mind to further investigation. I mean, that's the fear that I've most been familiar with, and it's the fear that we feel when we encounter a situation that's potentially dangerous or life-threatening. But in that fear, there is no rationing. There's no reasoning in that fear. It's not rational, and it does not lead to understanding. It just actually precludes us from thinking clearly. But the wisdom fear that we want to generate here is the opposite. It's a fear that's generated based on clear understanding of the situation that we're in. And it's also not the kind of fear that wishes that somebody would come and help me. It's not that kind of fear either. is a fear that realizes that there are steps to be taken to remedy the situation. And so the wisdom fear, I think, takes into account the Four Noble Truths, in that it sees the suffering, it understands its causes, and is focused on cultivating the path and generating the cessations. So that's where the wisdom, I feel, comes from, is to understand the entirety, both the situation as well as its potential. And the wisdom fear helps us generate renunciation when we see that worldly things, such as the pancakes this morning, although they can generate some pleasure, is really not lasting happiness. So for me, wisdom fear is like a launching pad where it helps me to be no longer so vested in samsara, but rather open to and looking for a way to move out of that, of samsara. And so that kind of a mental state, I think, is quite turns the mind to look for a way to transcend it. That kind of mental state helps the mind, or positions the mind in such a way as to look for guidance to get out of the situation. And it's in looking for that guidance that we then find and turn to the three jewels. But in order to establish the three jewels as a true refuge, we also have to then understand their characteristics and their qualities. And I realized again that I was lacking in that area of truly understanding what those qualities are and how they relate to guiding me or guiding sentient beings out of cyclic existence. So then the first jewel that I looked at was the Buddha jewel, looking at what makes the Buddha a reliable guide. And quite fortunately, we have received a number of teachings this year that clarify the Buddha's ability to be a reliable guide for sentient beings. And so for me, it was just a matter of honing in and revisiting what those are. So first he generated renunciation. We know the story of his life and how he left that life of luxury and pampering. So he generated the renunciation and the curiosity and the desire to look beyond where he was at, because he understood that that situation was unsatisfactory. So then he, based on his findings, the path of generating wisdom and generating bodhicitta, then he walked the path and realized the fruits of that path. And then out of great compassion, he taught it. So we can use reasoning to understand that because of what he did, he has the knowledge, he can impart the knowledge based on his experience and his attainments. And we can also see that since his time, that there are other beings, practitioners, who, practicing his teachings, have attained the same levels of realization. So it makes it very clear that the bases are there and valid. Therefore, the teachings are valid. Another way that we can look at it is by looking at the dependent arising, so cause and effect. When the causes exist, the effect follows. And as the Buddha generated the causes of liberation and full awakening through his practice, then the pertinent and concordant effects would follow from that, invariably. And he practiced both method and wisdom, so he attained the fruits of the accumulations of both of those. The accumulation of method resulted in the bodies, or the kayas, that he developed for the benefit of others, and also resulted, and the practice of wisdom, the accumulation of wisdom, then generated the truth body or Dharmakaya for his own benefit. So based on cause and effect, we can posit the validity of his attainment and therefore the validity of the teachings. Along the way, he progressed through the paths and grounds, which means that then he generated increasing capacity and skills to benefit sentient beings. So looking at that and contemplating that and thinking about the meaning of all those statements, then helps me increase and strengthen my refuge in the Buddha and his teachings. And in terms of the Dharma jewel, which is the true path and true cessations, thinking about the fact that the wisdom realizing emptiness is the true path, and the cessation, as well as the cessation of afflictions, are the true cessations, then that kind of helps me see what the goal is, what I'm aiming for. And how do we know that these cessations are possible? Because the afflictions are not one with the nature of the mind. So that's a key point. That because they're not one with the nature of the mind, then they can be removed. And so how can they be removed? By applying the right antidote that eliminates the underlying ignorance, which is the grasping as an inherent and existent self. And does such an antidote exist? And so yes, it does. It is realizing the actual mode of existence of the self and of phenomena. And then the next question is there a method for doing that? And the answer is yes. So by asking each one of these questions, specifically focus on how to generate the true path and true cessations, then there is a conviction that arises out of that. And that conviction is the refuge, in realizing that there is validity to attaining this state. So then taking refuge in them becomes easier. Then the last cause is great compassion. So here I contemplate on the kindness of others, the benefits of cherishing others, and the faults of cherishing myself. And I look at how all beings have been my mothers and loved ones in the past, and how all, without exception, want happiness and not suffering. And how just they're caught in the cycle of samsara. And why I want to focus on great compassion? Because I want the focus of the renunciation to lead to entering the Mahayana path, and in order to do that, I have to bring in bodhicitta, or at least lay the groundwork for bodhicitta. So this step is very important. And as I've done this, I've come to realize that refuge is not a one-shot deal. It's not static. It's not something that we generate once and then let go of, but rather it's something that we revisit often so that we can keep it alive and growing. And I've also realized that the more experience that I have on the path, and the more that I can validate the path with my experience, as small as it may be, that I can add all of that to increase refuge, so that refuge continues to develop and strengthen and deepen as the practice progresses. In the meantime, particularly in the difficult moments, focusing on refuge can be nourishing and can help me move forward. Thank you.